Many of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to be applicable and may affect other branches. So you want to be really careful about what you do. And everything should be cleared through Mr. Qua, pretty much most of the changes. Now, I'm sure he'll have a few things that he can add or subtract that you can change on your own. But as the headquarters supervisor, he's going to be responsible for those things that affect the system in general. We're going to go through in not really a random order, but in some sort of a order of programs. Some of these programs that we're going to talk about over the next 6 sessions are going to be basic background maintenance, database maintenance programs in CyberLab. And the point is maybe not so much that you are going to be responsible, each one of you individually may or may not be responsible for maintaining these systems, but you should be aware of what these systems do and how they operate, so that if something isn't working the way you would like it, or you would like to do something different, or use the system in a different way, you would have an idea of how that would work. So I picked a couple of database programs to start with, a couple of easy ones, and then we'll get into the test dictionary. Now the plan is for this to go until 10 o'clock your time in Singapore, 9 o'clock in Cambodia and Jakarta. And if we don't get done with everything on this list, we will just pick it up and we'll start with wherever we left off next week, Tuesday. And the next session will be Tuesday morning at the same time, with hopefully a little smoother start. And I will send out another invite for that meeting, and we will we'll proceed from there. There will be another set of handouts that you will receive to print out for that meeting. A little bit about the handouts. These things are just excerpts from the basic CyberLab training manual that we pass out to all of our new clients. These manual pages are not intended to be documentation. They are not intended to define all the fields and talk about all the things that are in there. It is designed for you to make notes in the appropriate places to help you remember how each of these fields and such are listed on your system. Now, I am actually just begin to share my screen. You should be able to see the CyberLab LIS main login screen. And if you don't, please unmute yourself and let me know, and then I'll wait a little bit longer. It is the test environment of HappLab Singapore, and that's where I'm going to use to demonstrate some things. I don't plan on making any changes, but if I do accidentally or need to demonstrate something, I can do it without affecting your live environment.
Sorry, Mr. Pratt. Hello.
Yes?
Yeah, I'm still hearing the noisy background out there.
Yeah, and you're hearing background noise?
Yeah.
I'm going to mute from my end whoever is here as admin. See if that helps a little bit. Otherwise, we may end up having to mute everybody one at a time, or I can mute everybody myself, but then I'll never know if you guys want to talk or not. So,
okay.
So let's just see how that goes for a little bit. And go ahead and interrupt me again if we're still getting too much background noise, because I should be able to hear it all.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So we don't we're going to start in a place that doesn't make much sense, and it's called the department heading maintenance. And this is going to be on page 18 of the manual that you are that we sent you. So all of the manual items that we sent are from the manual section 8C, so all you need to know is the page. Department heading maintenance is really a very small place, and if you'll know each of the tests that we run in CyberLab all have a department number. And what I wanted to show you is that in this screen, if we pull up one of them, we have the ability to give a name to a particular test. We need to classify it. And if you look at that, the department name, and your system is set up as Department 35, but it could just as easily be hematology, it could be chemistry, or it could be a special area that the tests are assigned. Department codes in CyberLab are used whenever we want to create a listing by department. Some worksheets can be created by department. Your pending work report can be created by department, and you can organize your tests, if you like, by department. Not done in GitLab, but it is a possibility. The department name can be, I think, 35 characters long, and you can have it show up on the worksheet. So when you print the worksheet, you see whatever the department is. Now, in the old systems, we really didn't need to define the department. We could just go into the test dictionary and give it an arbitrary number, and we would be fine. Now the departments, if you're going to use them in the test dictionary, they have to be defined. Now, this department director field is something you probably will not use. You will probably be, but it is intended to be used if we wanted to put a different director's name on a report, if we separated our reports by department. And of course, department has to do with where the tests are performed. Most of the departments, as a matter of fact, all of the departments that you use in CyberLab, in PathLab, are regular departments. Something just to be aware of, that there is a department type called Global Order Department. Global Order is a feature that's in CyberLab that allows a test to be created such that whenever it's ordered, it doesn't require any results. It isn't reported on the patient's report, but it generates a document to be printed at a specific printer. A lot of our clients use global order entry to identify a problem with the sample so that it alerts someone else to follow up on it, but it doesn't hold up the processing of the sample. So, for example, if you got a requisition for a report that they ordered some tests, but there was some information missing, you could create a global order test that would send a document to a person or a printer that would say, please find out this information on this sample and report back. Now, let me use this as an opportunity to say that anything that you see here tonight or this morning that you want to pursue or you want to look in further, then I would suggest that you make a note of it and you get to Mr. Qua with it, and then he will get with me and we can have a special session on how you might want to use it. So that's the department heading, and that's how those are the things that you will use for your department. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the test dictionary. Now, very, very quiet, so I'm assuming that the background noise has stopped. If there are any questions on this department field, I will stop after each section to talk about questions. So please unmute and let me know. Excellent. Okay. The next section we want to look at is send out code maintenance. And the reason I'm doing these codes is because these codes, the department head codes and the send out codes, are codes that are used in the in CyberLab. When we do the test dictionary, a test can be assigned to it. Send out in the parlance of CyberLab is a test that's not performed at PathLab. It's a test that you send out to another laboratory to perform outside of PathLab, and they send you back a result. These codes, when they're applied to a particular test, are codes that will print out on the report in a footnote fashion that says this test was performed by such and such a laboratory. So it offers a way to identify a test as being performed not by PathLab, but by some other laboratory. If we look at this one that's set up as the NUH laboratory, each send-out laboratory will have a send-out code. It's a single character. It'll have a name. It can have an address, and you can have client IDs. And the CLIA number is a U.S. Government identification for the laboratory, so it's a number that can be used for that. All of this information that's here can be part of the footnote that's printed on a report that has a result that was sent to this laboratory. Now, there are two special kinds of send-out codes. If we look at these send-out lists here, the Q send-out laboratory and R is the NUH laboratory. Y is SGH laboratory, and Z is Meditest. Now, in CyberLab, send-out codes Y and Z are special send-out codes. With all the other send-out codes, you order the test. When the result comes back from the send-out laboratory, you enter the result just like any other test in CyberLab, and it gets reported out as having been performed by the send-out laboratory. Also, if there was in some cases, we may have an interface with the reference laboratory, in which case that stuff happens automatically. The send-out codes Y and Z are special in that they do not require you to enter a result. Y and Z are automatically resulted with the contents of message code number 15. So we're not going to look at the comment master for a while, but we'll take a look at it for a second, and we'll see what's in message code 15. Message code 15 just has this dash. So that's going to be the result. Normally, in a lot of cases, it will say something like test performed by a reference laboratory. Please see separate report. That's normally what gets printed in here. So message code 15 is what shows up in send out code Y and send out code Z. The difference between send out code Y and send out code Z is that if you order a test that happens to be send out code Y, you wouldn't be able to print a worksheet. A lot of people use the worksheets as a log for tests that were sent out to a reference laboratory. If it's send out code Z, then there is no worksheet. You order it and you're done with it. The report is automatically resulted with whatever is in message code 15, and it goes on and uses it. Now, if you don't use it like you do with your message code 15, you're probably using Y and Z just like any other reference laboratory. But that's the purpose of the send-out codes. Are there any other questions? Now, before we move on, we're going to move into the test dictionary, and this is going to be very time consuming. I want to get a poll or make sure everybody is still here. So if you could just unmute your phones, your speakers for a minute, let me know that you're still there and I'm not talking to the wall.
Yeah, yes, I'm still here.
Good. And it's so quiet now that I'm glad to hear that. So very good. Thank you very much, and we'll move along if there are no other questions. And everybody can see my screen, okay? If you can't see my screen, then we got problems too. Now the text dictionary is going to start on page 24 of the handouts that I sent you. And this will take a bulk of our time tonight because it is one of the biggest pieces. Everything in the laboratory is about a test. And so these are some things. You will see some things that you may not be familiar with. You will see some things that are, how should I say, that you do know. So there's going to be some stuff in here that you already know, but in order to keep everything together, we're going to go ahead and start it. So you can see the test dictionary starts with in the file maintenance, database maintenance, test panel maintenance. And when we look at the very first thing, we look at all the options that are available here. And I'll talk about them a little bit now, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. Test maintenance, that's the bulk of it. That's what we're going to spend most of our time on, and that's where we're going to go. Range ID maintenance. One of the things that you may need to know or may like to know is that the normal ranges that we use for our tests, so the reference ranges that we use for our tests, are assigned to the test based on what we know about the normal ranges and what the instrument manufacturers tell us to use as the normal ranges. In some rare instances, it used to be a little more common, but in some rare instances, you may have two different normal ranges for the same test. In that case, you either would make two separate test codes, or you would have a range ID maintenance where you would put the normal ranges for that test for one range ID code and normal ranges for the other, so that if you enter the result, you would enter the range ID code. It's a little complicated, but it allows you to use the same test code for multiple different normal ranges, normal range settings. Handling procedures we're going to talk about inside the test dictionary. These are listing programs that just print out or display a list of the tests. And this one is really pretty important. The test dictionary changes log. What that does for you is if something changes in the definition of a test dictionary, you're going to not know. I mean, it's all of a sudden you're going to say, well, what happened to that? Well, you've got a chance to take a look at that. If you take a look at the changes log, what that does is every time somebody goes into the test dictionary and changes something, I think, you know, you can look at the date range. Make sure we get something. You can see what changes were being made, and not only that, you can see who made the changes. So if we look at this was done, these are this is the test code 295. We'll look at this one first. The test code 295 was this test name, IGF1, JD on July 4th at 15:33 changed the auto micro indicator was blank and they changed it to N. I'm not sure what that is, but they made some changes in some tests, and this was just the other day. So this is very handy if you notice something that may have changed. You can come in here, and normally how this is used is to the screen, and then you put in the test code that you want to see, and you want to see the changes from a particular a date range. That changes were made. So if something happened recently, you would be able to find it. So in this case, I happen to know that 295 had some changes. Now it's going to tell me. Well, anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in it, but just knowing that that option is there is very important, and you'll be able to find out something. Now, the big piece of this is the test maintenance. In CyberLab, there are 3 basic types of tests. The very simplest kind of test is a bill-only test. Now, it's called a bill-only test because it is not. It was original intent was for you to be able to order a test and not have to resolve it, and be able to and then its ultimate goal was to charge the test. So in the U.S., a lot of people will make a charge for a collection fee. So if they collect the specimen, if they draw the blood, if they collect the specimen, then they want to have a collection fee. So what happens is this test is part of the order, but it doesn't show up on the report, but it will show up and it will be sent as an ordered test. It has no results. The name reflects it. Other places that bill-only tests are used are for tests that may be like if you're doing, you guys don't do microbiology in Singapore, but if you did microbiology, sometimes they charge for the sensitivities, a separate charge, or they charge separately for the identification. This is another place for bill-only tests. Now, one of the other places to use a bill-only test is as a substitute test. When you have only people in the laboratory ordering the tests, they will know what tests are. But let's say that you'll set up a system where your clients may be placing orders outside of CyberLab or through the web gateway, which we've been talking about. And they may think a good example is something like acetaminophen is commonly known as Tylenol. Everybody doesn't always know that acetaminophen and Tylenol are the same thing. The way the system works is that we can create a substitute test. So if this was, let's just pull a test up, for example. Test number 12 is Cohen. If we ordered 995, this pill-only test, there would be a prompt on the screen that says, we're going to substitute Phenytoin for this. So the people ordering the test could order, let's see, I forgot what Phenytoin is, but they could order the generic, because this could be the generic. And it would come out on your system to be the test that you want it to be done. So it's a good way to substitute. So if they ordered acetaminophen or if they ordered Tylenol, then it would automatically convert to acetaminophen in the ordering department. I'm going to talk about the rest of these fields in the rest of the in the main section. But you do not have any bill-only tests in your system right now. So you're not using this feature. I know because I checked. You're not using this feature, but it is something that you may want to think about in the future, especially when you start communicating if you get connected to a billing system and there are things that you need to charge for that that you don't need to result or that they're not part of the test result. So, the next type of test we will talk about is a single test. Test is our standard, regular old test, and I'm going to use the PSA test as an example. Each test will have a number of configurable entities, and I'm going to go through each of these fields so that you know what all of these fields are, and then we'll go ahead and talk about those. So, who's back there? I'm still hearing some background noise. I don't like to get it. It just doesn't get interfere. So anyway, so each test has a test code. Now the test code that you select is set pretty much in stone, and that you can't go into a test and change the test code. You go into the test and change just about anything else in L. You can change anything else, anything with white that you see in the field in white, but you cannot change the test code. If it is important test code be changed, then you would need to create a new test with a new test code, and then delete this old test so that there is no confusion. Name is what appears on the patient report. So it says total PSA, and we'll talk about translation when we get down here a little bit farther. Yes. And so that is what shows up on the patient report. Now, this edition of CyberLab now allows their test names to be duplicated. I know that in the old days, you may recall that if we wanted to have two different PSAs, but one of them we ran in Hong Kong and one of them we ran elsewhere, we had to give them a different name so that they would be different. But we can now use the same test name for multiple test codes. And sometimes that's beneficial, sometimes that's confusing, but it is now possible. Each test can have an abbreviation. The abbreviation is up to 5 characters, and it can be used to order the test. It is also used in codes that you see if you're editing instrument results. But it is a code that you should be able to understand what it means and be able to remember it and use it easily if it is part of that. Keep in mind that anything in CyberLab that you enter is case sensitive. What that means is that PSA is different from PSA. Okay? That PSA, lowercase PSA, is different than the uppercase PSA. The abbreviation has to be unique. And it's like the test code. We can change the abbreviation, however, but I can't change the abbreviation to something that's already used by another test. The next field is the type. Most of the tests that you use are of the standard type. They're basic tests. They have a result. They have all the characteristics that go along with it. The other kinds of tests differential, the urinalysis tests are all, those tests are special tests. You don't use the differential test, but you will use the urinalysis test, which we'll talk about later today if we get a chance. The urinalysis test, it's like a panel. It has multiple components, but those components are not a test themselves. We'll talk a little bit more about urinalysis when we get to the urinalysis parameters. The drug tests and the therapeutic drug test types are not used anymore. We used to use them to help translate instrument data into positive or negative, and we're able to do that in a little better way now, so we don't use those anymore. The test type alternate, this is to identify a test that is linked to an instrument. It's kind of the foundation test for each instrument. And so if you go into instrument editing, and your 8888, for example, is an alternate test, and all the tests that are on the central link that are linked to that 888 are linked to this test. And it really doesn't do anything. It's nothing that you'd ever order. It's nothing that you ever result. It's just a way that CyberLab uses to coordinate all the tests that belong on a particular instrument. And it's also called the load list test as well. Calculated test is just that. It's a test whose result is based on calculations that the system makes. And we'll talk about test calculations probably next week. So those are the basic types. So we'll just talk about the standard test type now. The tube type and the tube amount are used for those clients who use our barcoding system. And they're designed to set up, I don't believe you even have any in here because all of your labels are pre-printed. But it's used to order the tests and calculate the number of labels that are required and print out the appropriate number of labels based on the type of tube and how much each of the ordered tests require. The requirements section is just a place to put text requirements. Some people use things like serum or whole blood or plasma or red top or whatever. They can put that in here, and it's just documentary. And if we look at the listing in the test dictionary, this will show up under the requirements column. If this test is a send-out test, then the send-out code is entered here. This is where the system attaches, when the result is entered, it'll attach the footnote that said this test was performed by such and such a laboratory. Most of the tests in the test dictionary are not send-out tests, but the ones that are should be entered in here to get that footnote. Overdue hours and overdue minutes are also usually having to do with send-out tests. The way it works is that if you have a send-out test, it's going to be pending as soon as you order it, and it may be a test that takes 72 hours to complete. And so you can run a pending work report for those tests and only give you on your list if they're past time they should be done. So you're not looking for a test that you just drew today when it's going to take 3 days before you get the result. The dwell hours for a test have to do with how often a test is able to be ordered. It's helpful to catch maybe in some places a requisition gets ordered and then doesn't get filed right, and somebody else picks it up and tries to order it again. It's also helpful that this patient just had a ProTime, however many hours ago, and you really want to do it again. So that basically what that does is it gives you a number of hours. So if you order that test again on the same patient within the number of hours that are entered as 12 hours, you will get the a warning. You will still be able to order the test, but you will get the warning. Delta percent and delta days. Delta checking is checking to see if the result for a test has changed significantly since the last time the test was run on the same patient. So if you put in 25% and you put in 30 days, what that means is that if the total PSA on this patient was 25% or more different from the total PSA that was run in the last 30 days, it will give you a warning. So if you, and it alerts, it's basically a quality check, so that if you have the same patient and all of a sudden they had something that was, bizarrely different, it alerts the tech to make sure that maybe they want to double check it. Again, I got to change these because we don't want to show up. QC checking. This has nothing to do with quality control, has nothing to do with the quality control setting. Basically, all this flag does is that when you go to enter a result for total PSA, it's going to prompt you, do you want to enter quality control data? And if quality control in CyberLab is set up for this test, and you say yes, it will take you to the appropriate place to enter the QC before you enter the patient result. If it's checked as no, then it will not prompt you. These two, call group code and always on the call report, they have to do with results that need to be called. The CyberLab has a feature called call reporting, and it identifies certain tests that you have configured that you need to make a call to the physician or a nurse that says, hey, this test, we were trying to call this test because it's high, because it's a test that we always call. It's a test that's part of a group that we do. A lot of places before, in the early days of CyberLab and laboratory systems in general, we didn't have faxing capability and we didn't have email capability, and so what the doctors relied on was that somebody would call them with the results of critical tests or tests that they needed to do to make treatment. I don't believe that you're using our call reporting system, but this basically helps to manage that call reporting system. Multi-procedure is actually being handled in a different way. It was a way to identify a test that was part of multi-procedure. It's now handled in what we call split sample. Basically what that means is if there are multiple samples, like a glucose tolerance test, a peak and trough drug level, things like that. So that's what that means. It doesn't get used anymore. A restricted test. A restricted test means that this test can be part of a panel, but it cannot be ordered. So if you put a yes in here, you would be able to, you would not be able to order this test directly. Where this comes in handy is that if you want to make sure, that a person orders a ProTime panel that includes a ProTime and an INR, and not just the ProTime, then you could restrict the ProTime and the INR and make sure the panel is only ordered. So the restriction is only on ordering. It allows you to from being ordered directly and helps you control that. So, the range type, each test has 3 different range types. Numeric is pretty self-explanatory. It's a number. We tell it what the precision is, how many decimal points. The alpha result means that we're going to enter a character representation of the result. It's going to be pause, or it's going to be negative, or it's going to be non-reactive or reactive, or NR. So that tells the system what kind of result to expect. Extended means that the normal ranges for this test are going to vary by, it's still a numeric test. Extended and numeric are the same. It's just that for the reference ranges, if I hit this extended up here, we're going to see another tab up here at the top in order to enter ranges, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So for the numeric, we enter a precision. We have units, and the units that we put in here serve only to label the result on the test report, so that we tell it what the units are. Signed ranges. Signed ranges basically ask the question, is a legitimate result for this test negative? Or can a result for this test be negative? The reason we need to do that is that if there's a negative, and sometimes a calculated result, I think the anion gap, if you ever report the anion gap, it can become a negative calculation. It's a if you and there's also a base excess if you did blood gases that can also be negative. This allows us to put a dash in front of the number to indicate negative. If we say no here, then the dash is going to be seen as an alpha character. And so it'll become an alpha result, and it'll display differently, and that way we can fix it. Welcome to Eva. I just noticed that flashing thing, and Eva is here. And I saw Mr. Tan join. Are you here, Mr. Tan? Doesn't want to admit it. Special range check. This is an interesting little feature, but it has to do a special range check. Recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe more, CyberLab changed some ways in which results can be entered. Less than or greater than signs are now considered valid numeric signs. I mean, they always have been in the real world, but in CyberLab, we always look at the less than and the greater than signs as being alpha characters, and so we would interpret that as an alpha result. So this came into play. So if we had a result, let's say the normal ranges for a test was 5 to 25, and the result was greater than 20. Is that normal, or is that abnormal? I mean, that's a rhetorical question. That's something, yeah. Mr. Tan, he's just saying about the mute button that we talked about before he came on. So I think everybody's muted. I'm not hearing too much background at this point. So I think we're good. So anyway, if you want the greater than 20 to appear as normal, which means it's going to take the absolute value of that and call it normal, then you would say yes. But if you want it to be abnormal, because greater than 20 could be 75, and if you wanted it to be abnormal, then you would say, no, I don't want a special range 2. And the other one, and the last one is another trying to catch all the different possibilities about what it is. If you have, if you don't put anything in the normal ranges, if you look up in the normal ranges that we'll look at here in a minute, but if you don't put anything in here, the system is going to assume that the normal range is 0. So you want to say non-zero result is abnormal. So what you're telling it here is that 0 is the normal range. Anything else is abnormal. So if you were to say yes to that, you're going to say that the non-zero result is abnormal. That means that anything but 0 is going to be flagged as abnormal. Now, department and report department. Both of these fields take their database from the same place that we talked about earlier. So your department numbers group tests into a particular department. Like we said, and the other thing, you can get those departments named. This first department field considered to be a test department. You can group the tests into departments that you want to use to break down your worksheets, your pending work report. Ad hoc reports can be done by, I believe, by department, or anything that you want separated by department. This is the field to do that. Report department. In CyberLab, we have the option of breaking up our reports and putting all of the tests from one department on a page, doing a page break, putting all the tests from the next department, doing a page break, and doing all the tests on the next department, and so on and so forth. You can choose to use either the test department or make a separate department called the report department, and then break up your pages like that. You do not do that at PathLab, but that is it is a possibility. If we ever get to that, but that's what that report department field is all about. Now the report sort number is an order that these tests print on the report, and it's basically a relative number. A order that the tests print, you will always print. If you use the report sort number, which you all do, then the tests are going to print out in the sort number order. So the lowest number will print first, and the highest number will print last. You need to know that if the report number is 0, it will print first. If you have multiple tests with the same sort number, the tests that are ordered first will print first within the same sort number, which is the generic way. If you do not use the sort numbers, then tests will print on the report in the order that they are ordered. In order to keep all of your tests consistent and all of your reports consistent, that's why we use the report sort number. It can be printed. So a test can have multiple numbers. So if you have a bunch of tests in there that are all zeros, then they're all going to print first, and then within that group of zeros, they're all going to print in the order that they're ordered. Line and column, just quick history on that. You won't use it, but in some specialized custom reporting, we were able to say that this test goes on this line and in this column of a particular report. Back many, many years ago, we used to have little ticket printers that we printed for CDCs and stuff. We could also print to those printers from CyberLab. Last one does apply very much to you. It's called the mod, or the modifier, and the options are either nothing or translate. when we say translate, that means that this test code 4303 has a bitmap file on the DDS server that will translate the result, the name total PSA, into the bitmap representation in Chinese characters for total PSA. That is the that's all that means. If translate is not selected, it will not look for a bitmap, and it will just print the test name as it exists in the test dictionary. If it says translate and there is no bitmap file for this test code, then you're going to see a bunch of gibberish. You will see five or six of the weird characters, and then the test code 4303, and then those 5 or 6 characters again. And so that'll clue you to call Mr. Cathy and tell him there's something missing on my bitmap file. How do you know about that? No, you don't. So that's what they're talking about. Bethesda cytotype, that's for Bethesda cytology. You are not using our Bethesda cytology program for your cytology tests, so we won't talk about that. If you would like to explore that, we can talk about that at another time. On the next page, if you turn it over, it talks a little bit about the single test interpretation. There's 2 little buttons down here, interpretation and handling procedures. You cannot use the handling procedures, but I will tell you about those. I'm going to go bring up a test that does have an interpretation to show you what's there. An interpretation on a test is something that prints at the end of a test once it's resulted, and it always prints every time a test is resulted. In this case, this particular test is an HPV hygiene test, and there are some things that need to be said about that test. They get put into this interpretation, and it goes on at the end of the test. Now, when you enter these things in, you need to be a little careful about making sure that you don't go too far. So it's a good idea to go ahead and put them in there, order the test and result it, and then see how it shows up. Always, 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 of course, use the test environment first. So that's what the interpretation. It is text that is printed after a test result once the test is resulted. It doesn't print until you've resulted the test. The next page, it talks about the handling procedures. Now, I couldn't find anything to do with handling procedures, but handling procedures are a way for you to knock on or to alert the order entry clerk that there needs to be something special about this test. Now, in your system, your specimen processors are not the same people that that put the orders into the system. So this may or may not be as important as it is in those places where the order entry people are the same people that are processing the specimens. These handling procedures can be things like spin it down right away, or make sure that it stays refrigerated, or if you're collecting for a patient, make sure that they're standing up, sitting down, or laying down, or just something that might be special about this particular test. Whatever is placed in the handling procedure will pop up during the order entry when this test is ordered. We're going to talk a little bit more later about some other options that are available called custom questions, which are similar to the way this works, but this is the way we have it set up in the test dictionary. So again, you don't use it, but if you think it's something that you might be interested in using, then we can discuss it at another venue. Okay, that is. Oh, we're not done yet. Go back to the prostate. Now, each test in the test dictionary has a way to measure whether it is outside of a reference range or within a reference range. Each test has a default normal range, which means that this is the range that's used if we don't have any other special ranges set up. And we'll talk about the other special ranges here in a second. We can put in a male normal range and a female normal range and a non-gender normal range. If the ranges are the same for male and female, all you need to put in is a non-gender normal range. The format, whatever is put into the format field, is what shows up on the patient report as the reference range. So in this case, the reference range is 0 to 4.0. You may want to put a space. I mean, you can fix it and dress it up and make it look nicer. So these numbers to the left are the numbers that control the flagging. So anything over 4 is going to be flagged as abnormal. This is what shows up in the 0.0 to 4 to 4.0 is what's going to show up on the report as the reference range. Again, you can do that. I think that's room for 9 or 11 characters. The panic or critical range are ranges that are flagged differently. They can be flagged. I think the generic flag for them is very high or very low. And they get flagged differently. They also can be queued to pop up a call window so that if you need to call somebody, then you can make it do that. Otherwise, it just simply gets flagged a little differently. The erroneous range. The erroneous range, I think, is kind of misnamed a little bit. It indicates that it's a result at which the values are in error. And it's designed to alert the order entry person that that's a really a number that doesn't likely to happen. And like if you were entering a 25 potassium, serum potassium level instead of 2.5, it could alert you as to that fact. In truth, the erroneous range is a range outside of which can be set so that only certain people can approve it. So if you did have a legitimate 25 potassium, you might have to go get a supervisor to enter that value, because that means that everybody in the lab wouldn't be able to enter it. And you don't have to have anything in the erroneous A range. Maybe there are certain tests that would qualify to be in erroneous range. But you can use it however you like. But if that person, and if you look into user class maintenance, which we'll cover in a few weeks, we can indicate which users can enter results outside the erroneous range. The other kind of a test that we're going to see for ranges is an alpha test. And an alpha test, if you recall, is the test that is resulted in positive or negative. This is the alpha resulted test, the monospot test. It can be resulted as positive or negative. Its default ranges are different. And you don't have anything here, which means that any result that you put in for a monospot test does not get flagged. Now let's say that the alpha result, the normal for a monospot, is negative, or NEG. So if we put in NEG here, and we put in NEGATIVE here, what that's going to mean is that a result of any D will not be flagged, and the format, or what's in the reference range column, will be negative. Anything other than any D will be deemed abnormal and will be flagged as abnormal. And the format will still say negative as the normal range. So that's something to think about. I couldn't find a test. I didn't take very long, but I couldn't find a test that had ranges in here. So you want to see if that's something that is possible. Now, the other type of normal range checking is extended. And basically what this means is that we take a look at CPK, which you have extended ranges loaded in here. You have a default range, 24 to 195 for male and 24 to 170 for female. This range will be used for flagging if the patient doesn't qualify for one of the extended ranges. Now, if we look here, we have extended ranges. We have ranges in days, months, and years. Now, one of the things about CyberLab is your age is a number plus an indicator. So today, it doesn't, for example, know that it calculates your age based on your birth date. So it doesn't actually know that there are 30 days in a month and 12 months in a year. So you have to set up normal ranges for each of the different so if each age range that we see in here, 0 to 1 day, 2 to 5 days, 0 to 6 months, and 0 to 1 year, 2 to 5 years, 6 to 10, and 11 to 16. Each one of those age ranges has the same setup. It's a little bit different setup, but same setup that we had for the ranges. So the non-gender for the ages 0 to 1 year old is 0 to 228. It's also used for species. So if you ever wanted to get into animal work or had a lab, maybe one of your side labs was a vet lab, then you could also put in for species. This range ID has to do with what I talked about earlier for range IDs for separate instruments. But we set it up for different ranges. We have a species, we have a male, a female, and a non-gender. We also have panic and critical and erroneous ranges for each of these ranges. One thing to know is that if the ranges are covered, we need to be sure that we've covered everything. So if you look at this particular diagram, we have 0 to 1 and 2 to 5 days. Well, if the patient is 6 days to 30 days old, it's going to go back to the default. And maybe that's the right range for the default. So if the way that works is if it's not covered in here, the same thing has to do with 7 months to 12 months. It's not going to get, we're going to be using the default ranges. So that's going to keep, the rest of it looks pretty good, 0 to 1, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 16. And so that also means that anybody older than 16 will use the default ranges. Okay. I want to know, are there any questions? Anybody have any questions? It's still kind of quiet out there. Unmute your microphone for a minute. Let me know that you're all there and you haven't put anybody to sleep. And if you have any particular questions, then we'll move on to panels in a second. Yeah, I hear background, but I'm not hearing anybody talk.
Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for chiming in. Everything is clear. Okay. All right. Well, I'm better than I thought I was. The next piece has to do with panels and panel maintenance. That's the third type of test that CyberLab has is panels. Panels are basically a test that you can order that contains multiple tests. And in this case, in many other cases, the tests can be themselves panels. Now, the test code is, again, a 4-digit number, and it is unique and never can be changed. Once you've started it, you have to delete it and reuse it or order it under a different number. The test name is the name of the panel. And this is the way that the test name appears on the report. Abbreviation, again, is a 5-character abbreviation that you can use to order the test. The department for a panel is less significant than it would be for a test, because a panel can contain multiple tests and that could be in multiple different departments. The report department would put this panel header. Now these departments and most of this stuff have to do with the test name, not any of the components. So that's where the report sort number comes into play. The report sort number is an order that the test name for the panel appears on the report. So that this one has a very low sort number of 13. So it's going to be very early on in the report. And it could be that it will show up with at the first. And so maybe all of your panels are going to show up first. It also has the ability to translate. You're not translating this particular panel's name, but if you did set it up to translate, you would have to make sure that there was a bitmap that meant general screening 16K connected to the 557 specification. The line and column, we're getting some background there. I don't know if everybody can hear okay, but somebody's making some noise. Maybe I'll put up admin again. That might help us. The line and column is nothing that we really need to worry about. The panel header worksheet has to do with putting a worksheet for this panel. Now, the only way that works is if you have one or more tests in the panel that do not have a worksheet, that are labeled as no worksheet. So one of the options that you have is no worksheet. And what that means is that that test is going to be entered as part of the panel, in the panel format. Now, in this particular panel, since there are no tests that have no worksheet, it wouldn't even allow you to put a yes here. When you went to say OK, it would say you can't do that. Send out code, and if the panel is a send out test, then you would put the send out code. The dwell hours are exactly the same as they are for a single test. You would put in how often that you would allow this test to be ordered. Kind of alert you that you may have already ordered it on this patient in the last 24 hours or so. Next field has micro, yes or no. You don't do micro at Path Lab Singapore, but if you did do microbiology and you said yes to this, what that means is that one of the tests in here is a culture type, and that when you order this panel, they will prompt you for a source. That's all this does, is it says it'll prompt you for a source, a microbiology source. The Bethesda cytology cytotype again has to do with Bethesda cytology and anatomic pathology, which you do not do, or you do cytologies in Singapore, but you do not use this cytology program. Malaysia they do, and so they are aware of these fields. The interpretation text, if you want interpretation to print for this panel when it's resulted, you would enter it here. And the kicker is that the interpretation text for a panel prints underneath the panel header. So it would say general screening 16K, and then whatever is in the interpretation would print, and then the components of the panel would print. So in order to get an interpretation remark printed at the end of a panel, you would need to put the interpretation on the last test of the panel. Handling procedures are exactly the same. If this test is ordered, you have handling procedures, they're going to pop up at the order entry requirement. Each component of the panel, everything when you order 557, everything down here is ordered. A couple of things to remember. You'll notice that you can have a panel within a panel. This panel can also contain a panel, but that's as deep as you can go. So you can't make 6 levels of panel within a panel within a panel. It's all that's allowed, a panel within a panel. One more level. Now there's also a, I want to say 500 test limit. So if you'll notice that there are 25 different components, you can put in actually 24 different components. We'll talk about the first component in a minute. So if each one of those components was itself a panel that had 24 tests in it, it would be over the 500 test limit. That's also a reason. So you don't really have to worry about too many tests, because it'll be very difficult. Be very difficult. The first field, the first component of a panel is always the panel itself, number 557. It's always there. It's automatic. You don't have any choice over it. The choice that you do get is heading or no heading. Heading means that the test name is going to appear on the report. And if it has an interpretation, the interpretation would appear on the report. If you select no heading, then the test name will not appear on the report, and if there was an interpretation attached to it, it would not show up either. Only then you would see the results of the component. Now, sometimes this is advantageous if you have some groupings that you've created in panels, but you don't want to separate them out with a panel name. So you might make a panel that has no heading. That's all that does right there. The requirements that you'll see here are things you do not use, except for possibly this. You do use the requirements field to put in some information about the test. You don't use any tube types and abbreviations and units. These all have to do with CyberLab's labeling system. And if you use CyberLab labels, and you use printed labels so that it doesn't come into play. At this stage of the game, okay, of course, validates what we've done. Cancel any changes that I made when I cancel would not be, but it would retain whatever it was before I came in here and messed some things up. Delete will actually delete this test from the test dictionary. Now, user class maintenance controls who has the ability to delete a test and who does not. My recommendation is that once the test is created and used, it should never be deleted, because your history is going to get all messed up if you have a test that was deleted. If you used it and you went back and looked up the result and somehow it deleted it. Deactivation is another thing that you can do to a test that allows it to never be used again. So if you're discontinuing a particular profile or a particular field, but you don't want to delete it, you will deactivate it, and that means that test cannot be ordered. It cannot. It isn't going to be used anymore. It's more than just being restricted. Restricted allows the test results to be resulted and it gets ordered as part of the panel. This test would never be ordered, never be able to be ordered. Now you can. There are user class options that have to reactivate. But once you deactivate it, you don't use it. Okay. Now we're running close on time. I was intending to go into your analysis parameters, but that's going to take a little bit longer than normal. So I'm going to skip the last item on here called custom questions. I'm going to. It's very similar to handling procedures, but we can test it. And then we'll pick up with your analysis parameters next week, and we'll be able to go over those things next week. So real quick, on page 34 of the manual pages that we sent out, you are not currently using custom questions, so it's nothing that you have seen before. Much like the handling procedures that we talked about, custom questions will prompt the order entry people to enter an answer or to at least be alerted at something. I'll go ahead and put in a test, a way this works. In custom question comment making, we can put in, somebody's getting some background again. Just use admin. I think admin is my problem. There's another message. Yeah, thanks, Eunice. So I just muted admin just to make sure, because that's where I was getting it, but I'm still hearing something else. It's not telling you who's talking, so. Okay. All right, so in the custom questions, whenever you order a test, you can have any number of up to 15 different questions or comments. It's, again, a comment only would be just like a handling procedure, although there can be many of them. The comments can be, don't forget to enter the insurance company. Don't forget to enter this number. Or don't forget, this test is important because you have to do it. Now, these are all types of tests. And your options here are to have a comment only, which means it's just like a handling procedure, a question and a required response, which means that the order entry clerk would have to put something in the answer field, and a question and an optional response, which means the question would pop up, and then they would be able, then they would have the option to answer or not. Custom questions and answers and comments can show up on worksheets, so that if it's a test that the technologist will need to know an answer to or needs to have additional information, the custom question can be asked at order entry. The clerk would take it off of the requisition and enter it in the custom question, and it would show up. These custom questions and comments also show up in inquiry, and they can be made to, like I said, on worksheets. It can also be put on the patient report if you like, and be part of the patient report. Internal use only means that it isn't going to be on. It's just only going to be used internally. It's not going to be. It won't show up on a patient report. It won't give you that option. So, so that's kind of all I wanted to show you with this custom questions. We have a few minutes left. If there are any questions, I'm going to open it up to the floor if anybody has any questions about anything that we talked about. Our next session will be Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock Singapore time. And we'll finish up with your analysis parameters. We're going to talk about result response maintenance. We'll talk about test calculation maintenance. And if we don't run out of time, we'll talk about the site test cross-reference. And so I will be sending out the manual pages for those new items this week, so you'll have them for next week. I'll send out another invitation, hopefully with the correct link, so we don't bog down in that. And I do apologize again for that. I know everybody was ready on the other one, and about one small little password that I needed to know to get it started on my end. So, questions from anybody?
你呢個係咯，如果都沾滿晒，一沾滿晒就 OK 噶啦，係要滿晒咯，因為呢扎聲都比較麻煩。
Yeah, no, I'm going to need you to speak English, unless you're asking somebody else. Unless somebody wants to translate. Okay. Oh, there's a question from admin. Who is admin, by the way? No, I'm me. I'm actually Spira LLC. Admin is where we're getting a lot of background, and I think that's we got a text from admin with a question mark. Who is the one that typed in the question mark? Nobody wants to admit to it. Any other questions? Anybody have any questions? Is this format working okay for everybody? Can you understand me okay? We're able to take notes? Mr. Kwa, are you still there, or did you go to get breakfast?
I'm here, I'm listening here all the way.
Starting to get hungry, though, I bet.
No, should be okay.
Okay, well, we just about hit the 2 hours. The next section is going to take longer than we've got left. And so I'm going to go ahead and let everybody go. If there's any other questions, you can communicate directly to me through email. I will be routing most everything. Here we go. Yeah, special range check, if it shows yes, it's probably just an error. It isn't going to do that because the special range check has to do with less than or greater than. And and I think if I remember right on 4303, it was well, it is an alpha test, but it could never be negative anyway. And that's the key for that particular test, was that if you ever recorded it as less than a particular number, how are you going to flag it is abnormal. So, for example, if you reported, let me put it up there. We looked at the normal range for the total PSA is 0 to 4. And if we looked at, and we said that the special range check is marked, so if you said that if you reported out greater than 3, do you want that flagged as normal or abnormal? And if you say yes, then greater than 3 is going to be flagged as normal. If you say no, then greater than 3 is going to be flagged as abnormal. It's just a way to interpret that because it's ambiguous. Because greater than 3 could be normal, but it could also be 7 or 8. I would probably say flag it as normal. But if you're always going to give us a number, if your number is say like greater than 15, it's not going to be a problem. Does that answer your question? I guess it answers. Does it answer the question, or are you going to? Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay. I like that. Good. We'll talk to you all on Tuesday. You have a great weekend. Finish the rest of the week. And take care.
Okay, bye.
Welcome, Mr.
Okay,
Tan.
thank you, Mr. Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Pan.
Thank you. You're welcome. Very welcome.
Bye
Talk to you
everyone.
all later.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.